I didn't have a typical childhood. Growing up in Northern Virginia, I spent my time exploring computers and technology, which set me apart from my peers. While others focused on school and activities, I was drawn to hacking and finding flaws in systems. Computers weren't just tools, they were gateways to a world without rules. By my 20s, navigating networks felt second nature, even if my unconventional methods weren't always accepted. Eventually, my talents got the attention of both the wrong and right people. What started as curiosity became a full-time job of bypassing security systems, both digital and social. I didn't question the ethical lines I crossed until one mistake put me in a life-changing situation. I first met Janet while working for the state's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. At 22, I was already steeped in hacker culture. Formal education didn't interest me. Instead, I thrived in the underground tech world, learning to spot system gaps others missed. This ability became my strength, both in tech and social situations. Interestingly, I wasn't just hacking computers. I was skilled at social engineering too. In fact, I got caught not for breaching a firewall, but for puffing on an undersecretary's cigar as a prank. To them, it was more than that. The INR gave me a choice: jail or work for them. A year later, I was their in-house hacker. Janet, a financial analyst, was working on a project involving a French diplomat. The project itself wasn't memorable, but Janet was. She was stunning, and every guy at the office was after her. I never tried, figuring I didn't stand a chance while my boss wined and dined her. Janet and I had a different connection. She'd come to me with requests, and we often worked late, laughing and talking like friends. I didn't realize it then, but I was basically romancing her without even trying. On the day we wrapped up the project, Janet asked if I wanted to grab a drink. Surprised, I said, "Isn't Rick taking you out to celebrate?" She scoffed. "We did this together, just us." I sensed something had gone wrong with her and Rick. If the hottest woman in the building wanted to have a drink with me, I wasn't about to say no. We went to a bar, and I noticed every guy wondering why she was with me. Janet is gorgeous. Dark Mediterranean features with striking ice blue eyes that make her stand out. She's also incredibly smart, with an MBA from Stanford, but I'd be lying if I said that was the first thing I noticed. As we talked, she suddenly asked, "Why haven't you hit on me?" I was stunned and didn't know what to say. She pressed, "Don't you like girls?" I replied, "I have a cat and a small apartment. Girls don't seem to like me." She laughed and said, "Why not? You're tall, good-looking, not an idiot, and a genius at what you do. In fact, people are intimidated by how skilled you are." Janet's compliments were making me uncomfortable. Women like her usually don't even notice guys like me, let alone flatter them. I nervously took a sip and said, "I've never been good with women. I think it's a confidence issue. Plus, I'm introverted, shy, and awkward, which doesn't exactly attract most girls." She looked at me with her sharp, intelligent eyes and said, "I'm not like most girls. We've worked together for 2 months, and I know you're socially awkward, but when it's just the two of us, you're funny, insightful, and deep. More importantly, you treat me with respect, like a peer, not someone to hit on. That's rare. I want to see if this could go somewhere, if you're interested." Who wouldn't be? Janet was the smartest and frankly hottest woman at the State Department. So we went back to her place. While she's brilliant, I quickly found out she's also incredibly passionate in bed. Janet loves everything about Zex, bringing enthusiasm and creativity to every encounter. Her energy was infectious, and she never got tired. We got married 32 weeks later. No one thought it would last, but it did. 15 years. Our marriage wasn't without challenges. We had our share of heated arguments thanks to her fiery Mediterranean temper and my brooding nature. But we always made up, and the post-fight Zex was amazing. For a while, life seemed perfect, so it was a shock when things didn't go as smoothly as I thought. Life, I've learned, is unpredictable. Even if you make good choices, karma can be unforgiving, especially if you live on the edge. As the saying goes, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. One spring night in Chicago, I was speaking at a national security conference. Afterward, I went to Gibson's Steakhouse to unwind. The bar was packed, but there was one seat left, unfortunately next to the kind of guy I can't stand. You know the type. Young, arrogant, and full of himself. Probably part of some elite crowd. These guys think they're invincible, always on the prowl, treating women like conquests. They're only in the game to rack up a score, constantly chasing that next high from meaningless hookups. I ordered a Gamma Ray Pale Ale. Craft beer is my weakness. As I sat down, I noticed the bartender looking disgusted with my two neighbors, who had clearly been drinking for a while. They were loudly discussing women they'd encountered, ranking them by looks and referring to them only by physical traits like the redhead in San Francisco or the Latina from Orlando. It felt like listening to guys talk about animals. The guy next to me started recounting his latest experience, bragging about a woman his buddy hooked up with in Atlanta. He described how dominant his friend was and how he liked showing off his control over women. The more they talked, the more uncomfortable I became, especially when he mentioned the woman's name, Janet. My wife's name is Janet, and she had recently been in Atlanta with a guy named Whitley Reynolds, a lawyer she consults for. The similarities were unnerving. When his friend asked about the woman's job, he replied, "She's some kind of accountant." That hit me hard. Janet is a consulting CPA, and she and Reynolds had indeed been in Atlanta. As the guy continued, he described how his friend had been pursuing her for months, and when she finally gave in, she was an absolute beast. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw a 20 on the bar and left. It seemed like too much of a coincidence. Janet's name, her profession, and the Atlanta trip. It was possible I had overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. The next 24 hours were filled with anxiety. The following day, I had to give a speech at a conference, but my mind was elsewhere. Normally, I play the role of a friendly, laid-back guy, but it was hard to focus when all I could think about was whether my wife might be cheating on me. I hadn't called Janet the night before, as we usually do when we're apart, because I wasn't ready to face my fears and didn't want to give anything away. The chances of Janet being the woman in question were slim, but even the remote possibility had me panicking. It was likely just random talk, and most of the connections were in my head. I knew the guy was exaggerating, but until I figured out if Janet was involved, it was going to affect me, so I needed a plan. First, I had to act like everything in our relationship was perfect. If Janet sensed suspicion, she'd hide anything incriminating, if there was anything to hide. I was aware of my own insecurity. Having a beautiful wife like Janet can make a guy feel uneasy. You know she's with you by choice, but choices can change with temptation. After 15 years of marriage, I believed Janet was loyal and trustworthy. I'd never seen anything suspicious in her behavior, and she remained loving and attentive. If she was guilty, she'd be a master at hiding it, but I had to investigate to ease my mind. It seemed crazy that overhearing a random conversation 700 miles away had made me doubt my wife, but my deep investment in our marriage was fueling my paranoia. Marriage isn't just about sex, it's about trust and exclusivity. The idea of Janet being with someone else was intolerable. If she was unhappy, she should have come to me, not gone outside our marriage. If she had fallen for someone else, I expected her to tell me, not betray me behind my back. For me, infidelity was a deal breaker, and I was sure Janet knew that. The next step was clear. I needed to gather information. I returned home late morning, knowing I had time before Janet got back. I approached the situation like a professional challenge. I'm a hacker by trade, though I call myself a penetration tester in polite company. This time it was personal. I started with a deep web search on Whitley Reynolds. In 20 minutes and $39 later, I knew more about him than he likely knew about himself. He was married with 2 kids, living in Chevy Chase with his wife Mary. He'd been a lawyer for 6 years, previously worked for the Baltimore DA, and had no major red flags on his record. But as a lawyer, he probably knew how to keep things buried. Reynolds specialized in financial management for clients who often faced indictments. Given that he was a criminal defense attorney, it made sense, and probably explained why he needed Janet's services, at least the professional kind. The other kind didn't require a degree, just her good looks. For 9 years, Janet had worked for lawyers like him, using her skills to uncover fraud or, if she chose, commit it. We both made good money selling our expertise, but I sometimes questioned why we stuck to the good side when it would be so easy for us to get away with the opposite. I assumed Janet, like me, avoided it because of guilt. But my recent doubts made me wonder if she was more skilled at deception than I thought. I knew what I needed to do: access Reynolds' computer. After lunch, I geared up for some war dogging with my large, intimidating dog, Buster. Janet had rescued him, and while he looks scary, he's actually gentle, but his size allowed him to carry 40 pounds of hacking gear without drawing attention. It was a hot spring day in D.C., so I grabbed Buster's leash and headed to Reynolds' neighborhood. To get into Reynolds' network, I needed to be close, and Buster's harness had everything I needed to hack without being obvious. Equipped with a small laptop running NetStumbler, Wireshark, and Brutus, Buster's harness doubled as an antenna, and we casually walked past Reynolds' house. Buster seemed to understand the mission, strolling slowly and sniffing around while I monitored nearby networks. When we reached Reynolds' house, my gear pinged his router. In about 30 seconds, Brutus cracked their WPA, and I set up an evil twin to take over his network. I released the twin from Buster's harness and casually tossed it into the shrubs in front of the house. With the device hidden, Buster and I calmly walked back to the car, mission accomplished. It was 3 p.m., and Janet would be home soon. I got out my special laptop, the one with tools bought using bitcoins from cracking sites. No one in their right mind would use a credit card for that. I confirmed that Reynolds' system was linked to my evil twin, wide open. I didn't need to download anything, it was all there to read, but I saved their trash files just in case. Most people don't realize hitting delete doesn't actually erase anything. I also started recording any system activity in case someone tried to wipe things. If anything was going on between Reynolds and Janet, I'd find it. I also planned to blue bug Janet's phone the moment she walked in, and later I'd rat her computer while she slept. By tomorrow, I'd know everything, her secrets and Reynolds' personal life. Was it wrong? Sure, but I could do it, and no one would know. It felt justified, given I wasn't the one cheating. After 15 years, Janet had always come home to me, never stayed out late with friends. I'd always seen that as a sign of her commitment. So I felt a little guilty as I scanned her phone. But then she walked in, as beautiful as ever, and kissed me like she'd missed me. Janet, at 38, still took my breath away. She's petite, playful, and always full of life. A perfect counterbalance to my nerdy, introverted self. She brought sushi from Kotobuki and sat across from me, dividing the food. "How was your trip?" she asked. "Enlightening," I replied. "How so?" she asked, curious. "I learned something that's got me focused on a new project. I'll be working on it until I figure it out," I said. Without any sign of guilt, she smiled and said, "That's good. I know you love a challenge. How come you didn't call last night?" I looked at her, still captivated by her. "I was wrestling with some things. Nothing I can talk about yet," she responded, still carefree. "That's fine. I worked late on something for Wick Reynolds." That hit me hard. I'm getting concerned about the situation with him. I think this will be my last trip with him. He wants to go to Miami tomorrow, and I'm going with him. But things aren't adding up. She smiled sweetly. My heart sank. "Maybe you shouldn't go," I suggested, hoping. She dipped a roll in soy sauce and said, "I have a contract to fulfill, so I have to go. But after this, I'm done with him." Was that a hidden message about ending an affair? "I'm going to use the money from this job to take us on a trip. I want to reconnect deeper than ever. How about a cruise?" I played along, smiling. "We'll see when you get back." But inside, I knew there were still answers I needed from her. She thought I was just being my usual dismissive self and didn't push it. Planning a long cruise would take time after all. But then, with urgency in her voice, she said, "There's something else. I've been aching for you all day. Can you do something for me before bed?" Whether it was pity or not didn't matter to me. It might be the last time I made love to her, so I followed her to the bedroom. Watching her walk, her body moving in that alpaca dress and heels, made me forget my worries about her fidelity for the moment. In the bedroom, she threw her arms around me, passionately kissing me in that way that only she does, completely consumed. Afterward, as we lay together, I had a sinking feeling. Is this the last time? She turned to me and said, "Promise me you'll be mine forever no matter what." I smiled and said, "Promise," though in my head I thought, "as long as you're not with someone else." As she drifted off, she murmured, "I'll leave early for the flight, but after this, I'll never leave you again." Once she fell asleep, I quietly ratted her laptop. I knew it was sneaky, but the stakes were too high. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop wondering, how could she seem so devoted and still betray me? I'm no expert on the heart, but the woman I knew couldn't do that. Marriage is built on routine, familiar, comforting habits. Ours had always run smoothly, but today was different. She left early before I woke up. After my morning run, I sat down to check Reynolds' system. The data was overwhelming, but I dug through it. I searched his deleted emails for anything from Janet, and there it was. A mother lode of about 50 messages over the past 3 months. The exchange began with a business inquiry and ended with something she sent just yesterday. I stored the emails and sifted through the rest of his files. There wasn't much of interest beyond typical family photos. Reynolds and his wife looked like they had the perfect life, attractive, happy, with beautiful kids and even a golden retriever. I wondered what would drive a man like him to go after someone else's wife. Maybe it was just the thrill of the chase. Some men never grow up, even after marriage. When I hack into someone's system, I always target encrypted files first. They only encrypt what they want to hide. I found an encrypted folder, and after a physical memory dump, cracked it within 5 hours. As I worked, I couldn't help but think that Janet was probably with that slimeball Reynolds. After decrypting the folder, I set it aside with his emails to Janet. I ran a keyword search but found nothing else of interest. I started reading the emails, which began as typical business messages 3 months ago but soon shifted. Reynolds clearly liked Janet after meeting her for lunch. While she remained professional, he quickly moved toward seduction. By email 33, things had become flirty, and by email 44, I found the damning message. Janet wrote, "You forced me. What we did has never happened before, and it will never happen again. I love my husband and value my marriage too much. You caught me off guard, and I'm ashamed. I'll fulfill my business commitments, but don't touch me again." The timestamp matched her Atlanta trip. Reynolds' response was predictable. He alternated between flattering her and threatening her with a lawsuit if she broke their contract. He even claimed he loved her and would leave his wife for her, while also bragging about how great the Zex was. Janet resisted his manipulation, but ultimately agreed to one last visit, clearly concerned about the contract. Her final message confirmed their meeting. "We'll meet at Flagler at 10 o'clock. We have to wrap this up today." I sat there heartbroken. Janet had betrayed me, but it seemed like it had only happened once, and she regretted it. She said she was forced, and I believed her. Maybe I could forgive her and move on. I knew from experience that once Janet's passions were ignited, she lost control, and Reynolds had somehow pushed her over the edge. As an adult, I understand that people make mistakes, sometimes doing things they deeply regret. If the situation had happened as described, it was almost attack, and her response was what I'd expect. Since she never thought I'd see those messages, I believed her explanation. But the issue was trust. If she could hide something like this once, could she do it again? We needed to talk. I needed her to explain why she hadn't told me, even though I could guess her reasons, embarrassment and not wanting to hurt me. But I had to hear it from her. I opened the other folder, which was correspondence between Reynolds and a client. It became clear the client was a consortium of high-level Latin American pill traffickers looking to launder money in the U.S. Reynolds was setting up the front companies, and he needed Janet's expertise for the financial structure. In her defense, it was obvious Janet didn't know the source of the money, just that it was foreign and substantial. Reynolds likely pressured her to stay involved because bringing in someone new would have been risky for him. My mind was racing. She had cheated on me, but only once, regretted it, and tried to get out. But what about all the flirting before? Janet was always flirtatious, even in front of me. Maybe she didn't realize this situation was different. Worse was her unknowingly helping criminals, which put her in real danger. I decided to call her, expecting voicemail. But instead, a man answered. My heart sank. It had to be Reynolds. Then the voice said, "This is the FBI. Who is this?" I hung up, but my phone rang immediately. It was the FBI agent, Mark Schneider, informing me that they needed to talk and would be at my house in 3 hours. I was in shock. What had Janet gotten into? Instead of pacing, I slept for 2 hours, then got up, showered, and waited. 3 grim FBI agents knocked on my door that evening. They tried to look compassionate, but mostly appeared bored. After some formalities, the lead agent said, "I'm sorry to inform you that your wife, Janet, died today." Even though I expected it, the news hit hard. I sat there stunned. The agent explained that she had been caught in a shootout between cartel members in Miami. She was at the office of one of the cartel leaders when another group attacked, eliminating everyone inside, including Janet. They believed she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I broke down in sobs. The agents, clearly uncomfortable, explained that they were handling the arrangements and advised me not to see her because it was pretty bad. I had started the day thinking Janet was cheating, and now she was dead. Too dead for me to even see her. The shock overwhelmed me and everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed hooked to machines. A nurse told me I'd had a psychological collapse, not a heart attack, and had been sedated for 24 hours. Then it hit me again. Janet is dead. The heart monitor spiked, and the nurse quickly sedated me again, putting me back to sleep. I was well enough to attend Janet's funeral. It was a beautiful spring day, but the coffin was closed, which I didn't like. Still, I didn't have the energy to argue. I was numb, barely functioning. Her parents, our friends, and my parents were there, all offering sympathy. We returned to my place for a somber dinner, and afterwards, I was alone for the first time in 15 years. It was terrifying. 6 years passed, and the pain remained just as intense. I lived in isolation, with only Buster for company. I missed Janet deeply and had no interest in moving on. After living with someone like her, everyone else seemed dull in comparison. Buster and I lived a quiet, celibate life. My friends gave up on me, but I didn't blame them. I was a shell of myself. Yes, Janet had cheated, but that betrayal was nothing compared to the pain of losing her. I knew the circumstances, and we would have worked through it. But her end of life shattered me, leaving no path forward. There was no recovering from losing someone I loved that much. Instead of unleashing my rage on the cyber world, I chose to become invisible. I worked relentlessly, driven more by compulsion than money. My life became nomadic, just Buster and me moving from one job to the next, unable to slow down. If I stopped, I'd face the emptiness of my life. There was always work for a skilled hacker, so I drifted from job to job like Clint Eastwood in The Unforgiven, beaten down and disillusioned. Tired of motels and their lack of real, pet-friendly policies for a dog like Buster, I sold our house in Georgetown and bought a $350,000 motor coach. Buster and I traveled in style, wandering the country for work. It suited my detachment from the world. That's how we ended up in Tombstone Territory's RV park one February. It was fitting, given my line of work. Sierra Vista is a small town in Arizona, near Fort Huachuca, the Army's main tech hub. I was there to conduct a covert operation at the fort, a dangerous job for which I charged $250,000. Despite the risks, I had protection, a contact at the Pentagon, Major Charlie Rafferty, who was my get-out-of-jail-free card. We had to meet discreetly, so that Friday we met at Linda's, a typical off-base honky-tonk known for having the prettiest bartenders in Tombstone Territory. Over a couple of Four Peaks drafts, Rafferty and I discussed the plan. My mission was to count coup on the 9th Signal ASC's network control room, a test of their security. If I succeeded, the Army would be in serious trouble. Rafferty was my backup if I hit a wall, but otherwise I was on my own. I didn't have a set plan yet. I needed to explore the system to find its weak points. As we talked, Rafferty kept checking out the bartenders, typical for a single guy in his early 30s. I might have done the same if life hadn't worn me down. Then, a woman walked in with a group of women from the base, and I was immediately captivated. She had long blonde hair, striking blue eyes, and a golden tan. Her classy white blouse and pencil skirt made her stand out. She was older than the others, but her body was incredible, reminding me of Janet, which stirred something in me for the first time in 6 years. Noticing my reaction, Charlie said, "Forget it. That's the Ice Queen. She's rejected entire infantry brigades. I've tried myself, and she acted like I didn't exist." Despite his warning, I couldn't shake the feeling I knew her. She was engaging with her group, her face full of life and intelligence. I didn't understand why, but I felt a deep sense of recognition. The resemblance to Janet was overwhelming, stirring up emotions I hadn't felt since her end of life. I left abruptly, throwing some money on the table, telling Charlie, "Next time you hear from me, I'll either own their systems, or you'll need to call off the provost marshal. Either way, I'm getting paid." Every town has its charm, and Sierra Vista's was the annual Cochise Cowboy Poetry and Music Gathering. On Saturday, Buster and I explored the event, listening to poetry readings. People kept their distance from Buster as usual, even though he was well-behaved. That's when I saw her again, browsing the shops alone. She wore flared white shorts that showed off her toned legs, with heels that emphasized her muscular calves. She radiated the same antisocial energy I felt. It seemed strange that someone so stunning was by herself, but she appeared to be just eliminating time like I was. I kept following her, trying to figure out where I'd seen her before. For some reason, I felt an urge to tap her on the shoulder and ask. That was an unsettling reaction. I hadn't felt the need to engage with a woman in 6 long years. In fact, I hadn't felt much of anything during that time besides loss and grief. This new feeling caught me off guard, and it was a bit unnerving. Maybe it was because she reminded me so much of Janet. She had a similar build, but the details were different. This one had long, thick blonde hair. Janet's hair was auburn, cut in a preppy bob that screamed Stanford MBA. This woman was a blue-eyed blonde with features just as perfect as Janet's. But while Janet was Italian, this one looked like an ex-California beach girl. I finally walked up behind her, intending to politely ask where we had met before. She spun around abruptly with that annoyed look women get when they think they're being followed. Maybe I wasn't as discreet as I thought. I saw the back-off creep in her eyes. Then her eyes widened. She let out a small shriek of terror, covered her face with both hands, and took off running. I've been rejected by women before, but I'd never seen one act like Satan himself had just appeared in front of her. It was totally baffling. "Buster, stay here," I said. He responded in his low, rumbling voice, "Whatever you say, boss," and sat. I ran after the mystery woman. She was bolting toward the parking lot like she was being chased by Cochise and his band of renegade Apaches. She almost reached her car, but remember, I'm a runner. She turned to face me, chest heaving with emotion, and in that moment I knew who she was, but my brain was telling me that I was completely wrong. Was I having a stroke? I thought ghosts only appeared at night. But she was breathing, actually gasping for air. I cautiously said, "Janet? What do you say when the person you've mourned for every minute of the last 6 years suddenly shows up in a small Arizona town?" She said with real fear in her voice, "Davy, you have to get out of here." I was still trying to process the information my brain was insisting was wrong, so my words were limited to single syllables. "Why?" I asked. She responded anxiously, "Because your life is in danger." My brain still hadn't caught up. Again, I asked, "Why?" Janet said, "I've made some very bad people angry, and if they find out that Janet Widger is still alive, they'll eliminate me and anyone connected to me. The only thing that's kept you safe is the fact they think I'm dead." Then her face crumbled. She covered it with her hands and started sobbing. "I did it to keep you alive, baby. You have to forget you ever saw me." Suddenly, everything clicked. The pill cartel, the financial schemes, the FBI, and the closed casket. Everything. She was in WITSEC. Running into her in Sierra Vista might seem unlikely, but it wasn't quite the 1 in a million chance it appeared to be. Fort Huachuca is a small place. Maybe neither she nor her handlers thought about it, but she was working at the one spot where I was almost guaranteed to eventually show up. Maybe there was some unconscious wishful thinking involved. I didn't know all the details yet, but I knew I wasn't going to lose her again in this lifetime. I asked, "Is the marshal anywhere around here right now?" Still sobbing, she replied, "No, it's been long enough that I just have to check in once a month." I said, "So, nobody around here knows we know each other?" She dried her eyes and said through her sniffling, "Probably not. I've been dead long enough that they seem to have forgotten about me. But we can't be seen together, or someone will eventually figure it out." I told her, "Look, I'd rather be dead than live another second without you. There's got to be a way. Can't we go somewhere and talk?" I could see the emotional struggle happening inside her. It was clear she wanted that more than she wanted to stay alive. She glanced around nervously and said, "Where are you staying? Maybe I can visit you there." I'm an expert in clandestine operations, and one of the key rules of good tradecraft is to make the lie big. So I said, "Look, I'm a widower and you're a hot woman. Why don't you just head back to the place you left in such a rush, and I'll pick you up like the lonely cowboy I am." It wouldn't seem unusual for a guy like me to want to connect with some local action. She gave me that look, the one that never fails to melt my heart. I could see her calculating the odds in her head. Then she smiled and said, "Great idea, cowboy. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. But remember, you'll have to buy me breakfast." She turned and walked away. I missed that intelligence. I missed her. Buster and I casually walked up to meet her 25 minutes later. I said, "Hi, let me introduce myself. I'm Davy Widger, and this is my old buddy Buster. We're not from around here." She looked sentimental. "You still have Buster," she said. I replied, "Who are you happier to see, him or me?" "Of course I'm silly," she said, lightly touching my arm in that flirtatious way women do when they're interested. I missed that sense of humor too. To anyone watching, it looked like a guy and his dog were about to get lucky. I said loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Well, maybe I should buy you a drink. I've got a place north of Huachuca City." A cheesy line, I know, but it was exactly what I needed to convince people I was excited, and she was a local fling. Then it hit me that her name wasn't Janet anymore. I asked, "By the way, what's your name?" She replied, "Janie Winslow at your service, kind sir." Clever. Keeping the name similar avoids any slip-ups. All the way to my car we talked, and she flirted. I tow a car behind my RV for local transportation, but it doesn't have to be boring. Mine's a John Cooper Works Mini Cooper with 230 horsepower under the hood. It's a convertible, so we shot out of town. Buster sat in the small back seat, looking majestic, his ears and tongue flapping behind him in the wind like flags on a clipper ship. It was a 15-minute drive at 100 miles per hour. There wasn't much conversation, mostly because it was hard to hear over the roar of the tuned exhausts in the wind. We parked and Buster wandered off to do his business. We stood together at the RV door, watching him. My heart was racing, and my emotions were swirling like the Atlantic in a hurricane. All I could hear was that little voice in my head shouting, "She's alive." Trying to sound casual, I asked, "So what do you do for a living, Janie?" It was just a way to keep the conversation going while I tried to get my emotions under control. She replied, "I'm one of the lead auditors at the Base Logistics Command. I handle basic auditing and control tasks as a GS-14. It was a huge waste of her talent, but it helped her stay under the radar. Once Buster finished, I opened the door, and Janet stepped in, followed by Buster, who headed straight for his food dish. I walked in behind her and closed the door. She turned around and threw herself at me, sobbing like her heart was breaking. She looked up at me, and we shared one of those deep, passionate kisses that only Janet could give. 6 long years melted away like they'd never existed. She moaned loudly, full of desire, as we kissed. I scooped her up in my arms, our lips still locked, and carried her the 30 feet to the bedroom at the back of the RV. I tossed her onto the bed. We were both like animals in heat. After satisfying our urgent need for each other, it was time to talk. She spent a long time in the bathroom. When she came out, I had 2 cups of chamomile tea waiting. She sat across from me in the galley booth. Needless to say, there was a lot to discuss. I said, "Before you say anything, I need to tell you. I know." She looked horrified, like that was the last thing she expected me to say, but she understood. You could see the shame and hurt in her eyes. She was completely shocked, but then she refocused. She said, "I probably don't need to ask how you found out, but I still don't get it." I replied, "I overheard something in Chicago that made me suspicious, so I did some digging. That was Whitley Reynolds. I know you slept with him, and I know about the money laundering. I had your phone bugged too, but the only thing I found out was that you were dead." She looked ashamed and sad. "He used me. The second time we were in Atlanta, it was the usual story. I drank too much, and up until that point, he seemed like a good friend. I trusted him." "I know," I said. "I read all your emails." She blushed and then paled, but kept talking. "So you know he got to me the same way you did. When we first met, I thought of him as a friend. I would have seen through a seduction attempt, but there wasn't much of that. It was just 2 colleagues, maybe flirtatiously interacting. I thought it was harmless. I thought to myself, I'd call it more of an emotional affair. But things had changed between us. We'd lived apart for 6 years, and perspectives change over time, especially when you think the other person is dead." She continued, "I didn't expect him to attack me. I wasn't so drunk that I didn't know what was happening, but my guard was down. Going back to his room to go over the next day's plans seemed natural. The second he closed the door, he was all over me. It was forced at first. He had me pinned against the wall within seconds of kissing me. I struggled for maybe 10 more seconds, but that only excited me more. After that, it became a conscious decision. It lasted a while, and I gave him the night of his life. It wasn't something I planned or would have done willingly at first, but afterward I was filled with regret and shame. I knew what I'd done. That's not who I am. I made the wrong choice, and I don't have any excuses. I'm truly sorry." She paused, looking at me sadly. The guilt was overwhelming. Even if you never found out, I'd always know. It shattered the way I saw myself. To make things worse, he paraded me around like a trophy. I suppose after what I did, I deserved it. The next day, we worked together like always. It was a bit tense, but we had a job to do. When we finished, I went to have dinner alone. I picked a restaurant in another hotel, thinking he wouldn't find me there. Of course, that made it a challenge for him. He hunted me down and sat at my table like he owned me. He gets off on power, and he was testing me. I wanted to dump my soup on his smug face, but it was a public place, so I stayed calm and called his bluff. You know me, always too civilized. That was a mistake because a buddy of his showed up shortly after. The idiot immediately started bragging. I sat there, quietly seething, planning how to get even once his friend left. At that point, I cut in and said, "I overheard your friend talking about you while I was in Chicago. He said you were completely in love with the guy and that you two were sleeping together regularly." She grimaced and replied, "He only wished. What actually happened was that he followed me back to my room and tried the same thing. I even flirted with him a little to encourage him, but this time, I was ready. As soon as he started to grope me, I reached down and squeezed his balls like I was making lemonade. You could probably hear his screams throughout the hotel. She chuckled. I laughed at him, shoved him out into the hallway, and locked the door. But I still had to deal with him until the engagement was over. I said, I knew all of that, except the part where you crushed him. I saw you trying to distance yourself. That might have worked in your favor when we had the conversation we should have had after you got back from Miami. She looked relieved. And you obviously read what I sent him afterward. Did it sound like I was in love with him and sleeping with him regularly? I shook my head. No, with an ironic smile. She continued. You also know I planned to stay in a different hotel on that last trip, just to make things clear between him and me. I honestly thought you'd never find out. And, of course, I didn't know you already knew. I'm telling you the truth, and I'm sure you believe me. I knew she was telling the truth. I had read their messages probably 1,000 times over the past 6 years, and every possible interpretation fit what she was saying. But I had another question, the only one that really mattered, or would have if we had talked when she got back from Miami. I asked, how could you act so calm with me afterward? You didn't show the slightest hint of guilt. That's what bothered me the most. Since you're such a good actress, how could I trust you not to lie to me again? She frowned and said, part of me wants to tell you to just get over it. I acted the way I did toward you, and it wasn't easy, so I could protect you from the consequences of my bad choices. I knew it would hurt you no matter what my intentions were, so I put it all on myself. It was easier because I knew I'd never let it happen again. She stopped and looked at me defiantly, daring me to doubt her. She had compartmentalized her feelings, knowing it wouldn't happen again. That was Janet to the core. She might be small, but she's tough as nails. She could act normal for as long as needed. I still wasn't sure how I felt about the deception, but it wasn't an issue anymore after everything that had happened. She seemed to read my thoughts. Her gaze softened, and she took one of my hands in both of hers, looking deeply into my eyes. She said, putting all that aside, the part of me that loves you more than anything wants you to know that I would never betray you again. I would spend every day of the rest of my life proving my commitment to you, and I'll never have to lie to you like that again. I learned a hard lesson that night, one I'll never forget, and it stayed with me these past 6 years. She paused, her voice softening with the weight of her memories. I know I was too confident and foolish when it came to men, but now, once burned, twice cautious. I've turned down every suitor over the last 6 years because I felt like I owed that to you, even though I thought you believed I was dead and we'd never meet again. I know that sounds crazy, but it was part of my personal penance. If you don't believe me, check around the base. She smiled wryly. But thanks to Major Rafferty, you don't need to. I nodded, understanding the depth of her confession. She leaned back, giving me a crooked smile. So, take your pick. Which answer do you prefer? I smiled back at her and said, I'll go with door number 2. Then I added more seriously, that other woman was someone named Janet Widger. She died 5 years ago. I've barely gotten to know Janie Winslow. 6 years is a long time, and I think Janie Winslow has learned a lot. In the meantime, I know you're not the same person. She gave me a smoldering look and rubbed her bare foot up and down my leg, communicating a silent promise. With absolute sincerity, she said, I know what it feels like to lose the most important thing in my life, and I won't let it happen again. I had already guessed the general circumstances of her staged end of life, but I needed the details to finally put the pain of the last 6 years to rest. So I asked, what happened in Miami? She sighed deeply and began, 2 FBI agents met me at the gate at MIA. They rushed me into a car. Apparently, they had been monitoring the guys we were meeting with. After driving for a bit, they transferred me to a van filled with surveillance equipment. The special agent in charge was inside. He told me they knew everything I was doing. I told them I wasn't doing anything illegal, just setting up the financial structure for a couple of new corporations, as I was contracted to do. I also mentioned that I had recently discovered I was dealing with organized crime. I think I hinted that I suspected something was wrong the day before I left. Either way, I offered them my evidence. They told me that the only way to prove I wasn't involved was to wear a wire to the meeting. They had me cornered, so I agreed. Unfortunately, the cartel had a frequency scanner and picked up the wire almost as soon as the meeting started. Once my cover was blown, the FBI stormed in, and there was a shootout. I was shot in the forearm and hand. Wu was eliminated outright, and all 4 cartel members at the meeting were also eliminated. She paused, tears forming in her eyes as she recalled the details. I waited quietly for her to continue. After a moment, she looked at me and said, 2 FBI agents visited me in the hospital. They gave me 2 choices: go to jail for unknowingly being involved in illegal activities, or testify and enter witness protection. Either way, you had to believe I was dead to keep you safe from the cartel, and they'd already told you I had died. She took a deep breath. That news crushed me. One moment I was flying out of my normal life, and the next, I was in a nightmare. I cried for hours. My testimony helped take down a major pill cartel, and if I hadn't died in that raid, they would have eliminated both of us. If they knew you were still my husband, they'd have made an example of you. Her voice trembled. I had to be publicly dead, which is why it was all over the news. The FBI couldn't fake your end of life too without raising suspicion. Thankfully, my severe injuries provided a convincing story. She turned her arm, revealing large scars. I was at my own funeral, watching your grief. It nearly destroyed me. They moved me to Albuquerque, and eventually I got a job here at Huachuca. She looked down, her hands tightly clasped. I've spent 6 years without you, and it's been the hardest time of my life. I don't date, and I only socialize to blend in. I changed my appearance to avoid being recognized. It's easier for women. You just grow your hair and change its color. The tan and blue eyes make me look more English than Italian now. She glanced at me with a teasing smile. Do you like the new me? I smiled back and said, I love the old you and I adore the new you. You coming back is a miracle, and I'm never letting you go again. She gasped. But you have to. If we're seen together, it could blow my cover and put us both in danger. I replied calmly. Leave that to me. Do you want to be my wife again? She studied my face, her gaze intense. I betrayed you and made you think I was dead. Why would you want me back? She asked, her voice trembling. I love you, I said simply. I always have. You've been the other half of me since we met. You gave me more love than I ever could have asked for, and our marriage was the happiest time of my life. Her expression softened as I continued. I understand what happened with that man now, but after 6 years of believing you were gone, the woman I thought betrayed me has been gone for a long time. You're a new person to me now. I just met Janie Winslow, and she's not the same as Janet Widger. You've changed, and so have I. I chose my words carefully. 6 years of grief changes a person. We both went through it. In my mind, you're a new woman who resembles my late wife, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Any past mistakes are irrelevant now. I leaned in. I know why you're in witness protection. You had no choice. I've accepted that. Any pain I felt was collateral damage, and I can move past it. She searched my face, looking for doubt. I said, I've mourned a wife I thought was gone, and now I want this new woman I've met to take her place. Are you willing to start over? She looked at me with joy and relief in her eyes. Yes, she said softly. 2 days later, I contacted Charlie at the 9th Army Signal Command. After 3 intense weeks of debriefings where I pointed out all the security gaps, they wrote me a hefty check. I picked up new IDs, driver's license, passports, credit cards, and social security paperwork before heading back to the RV. By then, Janie Winslow had quit her job and vanished. Records hinted she moved to Maine, but there was no forwarding address, and her participation in the witness protection program had been erased. Janie Winslow had become as much a ghost as Janet Widger. The exploit to disappear was easy, thanks to a flaw in the Justice Department's HR portal. I found 2 perfect identities: William Weston, who died on Air France 447, and his widow Sarah, who died in a car crash. Erasing Janie from the system took time, but eliminating myself was simple, with the help of my trustworthy brother. He had a financial interest in keeping me dead, thanks to the success of the company he now ran. With new identities, Bill and Sarah Weston, along with Buster, left Tombstone territory in a luxury motor coach, the theme from the Magnificent Seven playing as we rode into the sunset. Now, nearly 10 years later, we sat on our yacht in Naples, enjoying the sun and sea breeze after a tour of Falerno wineries. We had finally stopped looking over our shoulders. I had set tripwires in various systems to alert me if anyone looked into Bill or Sarah Weston, but so far, nothing. We lived in Cortona, the perfect hideaway, far from anyone who might recognize us as Dave and Janet Widger. We spend our days exploring the Mediterranean, enjoying life together. At 54, Janet is still as stunning as ever, and Italian men appreciate her beauty at any age. But it was never her looks that captivated me. It's her intelligence and strong values, which have only deepened with time. 6 years apart, thinking we'd lost each other, shaped our marriage into something wiser. I never doubt her love or decisions now. Life throws challenges, but Janet has the strength to face them, and I trust her completely. Carpe diem isn't just a saying here. It's how we live. As we sat, hands intertwined, watching the light on the water, I thought about how surreal our journey had been. From grief and loss to this moment, free, happy, and alive. I turned to her and said, "I wouldn't change a thing." She smiled, that smile that still makes my heart skip, and softly replied, "Neither would I." In that peaceful moment, I realized just how far we'd come, not just from Arizona to Italy, but from despair to joy, from end to life. Life had given us a second chance, and I intended to live it fully, with her by my side.